Okay. How are you? ¿Gusto de nuevo? Welcome, everybody. We are going to get started. I'm Sofía García, the representative to the UN of SOS Children's Villages International. It's a pleasure to see a full room today. Thank you, everyone in the room, for joining us. We know it's busy times, we know it's difficult times, we know it's negotiating times, but we are very happy that you are with us today to take 1 hour of your busy days to remember who we do this for and who we are here for, to get some energy from the children and their voices, and then go back to business and get things done. Also, welcome to all of you joining online. We have more than 200 people, for what I understand, joining from all over the world. So welcome to those joining online. Just as a housekeeping point, we have interpretation into French and Spanish, en español y en francés, both here in the room and for the people online. And we have a busy program and an amazing panel, so I don't take one more second. Let's get started. We have the pleasure and honor of having Ambassador Lagati, Deputy Permanent Representative of Belgium to the UN, to get us started and open the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and colleagues, friends, it's also an honor for me and a real pleasure to be with you here today and to open this event. Promoting and protecting children's rights have always been and will always be an absolute priority for Belgium. The 35th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, therefore, is an occasion of utmost significance to us. I thank our co-hosts, SOS Children's Village, and in particular, Mrs. Buykens, Mrs. Ndong, and our moderator, Mrs. Garcia, for having partnered with us on this initiative. In addition, I look forward to the insightful contributions of our other speakers, Mrs. Gray from UNESCO, Mrs. Mikavica from the Office of the SRSG for Children and Armed Conflicts, and Mrs. Perez from the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, and of course, most importantly, to learn from the messages from the children around the world in just a little bit. We also gladly acknowledge our co-sponsors, the permanent missions of Guatemala, Uruguay, and Canada. Colleagues and friends, above all, this event will allow to put into practice one of the central principles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to guarantee that children's voices and their recommendations are heard. They have the right to participate in decisions that affect them. We should heed this imperative also, and maybe especially, when it comes to creating a more peaceful world. As will become clear during this event, millions of children continue to suffer from the devastating effects of armed conflicts. They face unimaginable hardships, displacement, loss of family, and physical and emotional trauma. Also, in conflict-free regions, children are not immune to the ripple effects. News of war and violence cause deep emotional distress, fear, anxiety, and frustration. And I see it actually with my own son, who is 6 years old only, but he asks me on a regular basis why they are still fighting in Ukraine or in Palestine, and if children are really still dying there. When children come together and get the chance to express themselves in their own way, they call on decision makers to uphold the articles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Article 38, Article 6, the right to life, survival and development, and Article 19, protection from violence, abuse and neglect. By stomping for peace, they call on us to listen, to learn, and to act. I trust that our deliberations today will contribute to creating a more peaceful world. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And for the second part of the opening remarks, I have the pleasure to introduce Ms. Hilde Boykens. She's the CEO of SOS Children's Villages in Belgium. Hilde, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sophia. Dear Deputy Ambassador Laracy, esteemed government representatives, civil society colleagues, first of all, excuse me for my raspy voice. I've been a bit ill over the last few days, but I just couldn't stay away because I promised too many kids to represent their voices here today. Many of us probably have children, some of us also grandchildren. As a parent myself and a grandmother, it is my daily concern that our children can grow up safe and happy. Imagining that tomorrow war would come to our country and our children should live the physical and psychological consequences of war is a real nightmare for me. Yet this nightmare is a devastating reality for millions of children in today's world. Can you imagine? 470 million children are growing up amid war and conflict. Over 30 million children have been forced to flee their homes, left vulnerable to abuse, exploitation, and deprivation. 35 years ago, the governments you represent adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This convention is not just a list of suggestions. It lays out a series of obligations and serves as a worldwide moral compass. A moral compass that should inspire us, motivate us, and drive all our actions as decision makers and global leaders. On the eve of the 35th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we should ask ourselves, are we fulfilling our promise to protect children's rights and prioritize their safety, well-being, and best interest? In my personal view, and with 20 years of experience in this sector, I have to say the answer is no. Every day, children are harmed under our watch and our inaction. The scars of conflict, emotional, psychological, and physical, are unfair and inhuman, and they persist long after the fighting stops. The consequences of war and violence are felt by the children, the adults, and their societies for years, and if not addressed, for generations. No child should endure this, no society should accept this, and no economy or political system can thrive under these conditions. It is high time for leaders to uphold their obligations under the Convention and ensure that children's rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled. Most of you know what humanitarian law and the Convention require us to do to protect children, so I won't repeat it today. But the one action that I want to underline is the need to prevent child-family separation and family loss. As an organization that works every day to prevent family separation and that sees the devastating consequences for a child when losing the care of their parents, we cannot underline enough the fulfilling this right is something that must take priority. Today, I am proud to share the story of Stomping for Peace, a movement from and for children with a collective demand for change. The Stomping for Peace movement started in March of this year in Belgium, where thousands of children in schools decided to stomp their feet on the ground to clearly show their worries, fear, and anger when looking at the daily images of war and conflict throughout the world. But also with a clear message to governments. We want peace, stop the violence. This simple yet profound act of children caught the attention of the Belgian media. It amplified their voices and inspired hope and urgency. We then shared this idea through the SOS Children's Villages Federation, operating in more than 130 countries and territories. And today, more than 40 countries are true advocates and are stomping for peace. Children learn about the Convention on the Right of the Child, about the UN as an important institution that was created to secure peace and prosperity. They still believe that people at the UN will listen to them and act and can really make change happen. Please don't disappoint them. We will now play a video about this movement with the support of Martin Garrix, a famous Dutch DJ. And if you don't know him, just ask your children or your nieces or nephews, they will know him, who has donated his song, Aurora, to be the heartbeat of this movement, a soundtrack for unity, resilience, and hope. To those here with us and those watching around the world, just feel free to stand up, stomp your feet, and follow the collective force of this call for peace and hope. Thank you.
He was 9, and everything was going well. Until a war tore him apart from his family. I feel sad. I am upset. So we stomp.
Every day children are dying. We are stomping for peace. Please stop the war. Intentándole que no se ponga más triste sobre la guerra y ponerlos como nosotros, felices, cosas así.
Turns out that he is not alone. This is a global problem. Children from all over the world are suffering. Growing up in danger without their parents, this can't continue. He does not stand alone. No child should ever grow up alone.
Well, the stage is set. I have not seen anybody stomping. It seems you're not angry enough, or maybe you are, but we've been trained not to show it like children do. I recommend, though, you go back home, you think what you do every day, you look at the world, shut the door, and stomp in your room a little bit. Feel it. Be a little bit angry. We have enough reasons to do that. And then get to action. Let's solve the problems. And for that today, we have amazing panel of experts and people that can share ideas, that can share recommendations. Let's roll up our sleeves. I'm about to take off my jacket so that we can get to action. What can we do and what can we do now? all of us in the room, civil society, governments, students, thanks for coming, and all of us online, including some of the children that are watching us and are going to watch the recording afterwards. I'm going to start, let's do a first round of questions maybe about what is the panorama? What are we really talking about? What have we done and what is going on that makes children stomp on the ground in anger? And then the second part, we're going to talk a little bit about what can we do about it, and get some recommendations from you. The first panelist is not in the room, but is the most important one. And I would say, with all due respect to the rest of the experts and excellencies, the real experts and the ones that can really guide the rest of the actions we plan during the next hour in the event today. We're going to have a video again. Flying children around the world to come to the UN is not always easy. We should do it more and more often. But this time, we opted to have 3 children from a school in Belgium that we thought summarized very well what we have heard through the campaign. And they said we have a message for the UN. As Hilde was saying, they still look at us and trust in us. Let's see for how long. It depends on us partly. And they have a message for you, mostly governments in the room. So let's get to it. What are children telling us to do?
Ik ben Emil en ik ben hier om te spreken voor kinderen over de hele wereld.
Ik heb het geluk om hier veilig in België te wonen, maar veel andere kinderen hebben dat niet.
Biljoenen kinderen wonen in oorlogs- en conflictgebieden. Ze hebben dagelijks te maken met gevaar, geweld en pijn. Terwijl ik naar school ga, speel en sport, moeten zij omgaan met bommen, het verlies van hun huis en het verlies van hun familie.
Ik begrijp niet dat volwassenen met oorlog conflicten willen oplossen.
Ik zou echt niet weten wat ik moet doen zonder mijn mama en papa.
35 jaar geleden beloofden de Verenigde Naties om de rechten van kinderen te beschermen. Really? Echt waar? Het is alsof de wereld ervoor kiest om oorlog en geweld in stand te houden.
Jullie hebben nog veel huiswerk.
Ik heb een boodschap namens alle kinderen. Wij willen vrede. Stop met vechten en begin aan een veilige toekomst voor kinderen.
Ik vraag echte verandering. Oorlog raakt ons allemaal. We zijn allemaal verdrietig, bang en boos. Doe beter je best.
Het is tijd voor actie.
Action. Many of the voices collected for the campaign have been done through school. The education system is essential for children to participate through the system and because of the education system. And many of the voices have talked about education, and children really see a strong connection between education in its broader sense and peace. We are very lucky to have our first panelist, or second panelist, Lily Gray. She's senior officer, liaison officer here in New York for UNESCO. Lily, maybe we start with asking you, UNESCO has done a lot of work about peace and education. How can education help us prevent conflict in the first place?
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and good afternoon, everyone. I think it's very hard to step in the conversation after these most powerful messages, full of clear advice and guidance, but also full of determination and passion. And indeed, thank you for inviting UNESCO to be one of the speakers today. You know, our mandate, the mandate of the organization is indeed to build peace in the minds of women and men through education, sciences, culture and communication. Let me tell you, in response to your question, there is a global recognition that indeed addressing conflicts and notably preventing conflicts needs to start with education. Recent global development, I can share with you, just a year ago, UNESCO led the international community to agree on a revised recommendation on education for peace. and that has set up a number of key guiding principles. And certainly it's the overall understanding that is now shared by the young champions for peace just ahead of me. The clear understanding is that education should be able to empower individuals through a lifelong learning approach and to equip them with the knowledge, with the skills, both social and emotional skills, but also attitudes and behaviors, to be indeed an engaged citizens of the world and to be able to address global challenges, including the increased number of conflicts that we are unfortunately facing nowadays. So what does it mean in the educational community and how is education a tool for prevention for conflicts? First of all, we all know that every single child every single child's right to education should be fulfilled. So we are talking about the fulfillment of the right to education through a 12-year mandate for every single girl and boy around the planet to be offered equitable, inclusive, quality and relevant education. That's one thing. And then the second thing is the education for peace. And here we are talking about the understanding what do we need to do in order to transform the way we teach and what we teach in order to guard and put the fences against conflict and against violence. So I think I have a very brief time to engage, but I wanted to just mention a few kind of advices on that. One thing is that it's very important indeed to build, for example, on the histories of, on the lessons from history, including the way we teach history related to tragical events of humanity in order to build the sense of solidarity, the sense of compassion, the sense of belonging among young people. And here I'm talking about, for example, the history about slavery, the history about the Holocaust, the history about the recent dictatorships regimes that many of our countries represented today have lived through in recent decades and years. It's a very tricky subject. It's part of the national sovereignty of the country, but the way countries and educational systems revise and design the curriculum and the way what is taught through the curriculum should be taken into account, so that education indeed is aiming to prepare the speakers with to prepare the learners with the respective competencies to address global challenges. Very often, subject area knowledge at schools is being presented in without any relations to without any correlation to reality. So this needs to be updated. And the other thing is how teachers, the way teachers engage with the learners. We all know that teachers are as much teachers as they should be learners, but certainly adopting cooperative approaches through project-based activities, fostering collaborative spirits. This is one way UNESCO is advocated and supporting member states and education systems. So I just wanted to put forward these elements and also to remind everyone that to build on the message indeed that education is a powerful tool to prevent conflicts and address them at the right time through the right approaches. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Lily. So education is one of the best tools we have, and the message is we need to invest more in it and make sure it's focused on peace and collaboration. And I would highlight from what you have said, it's about lifelong learning, but also attitudes and behaviors. It's not only what we call hard skills, but also the soft skills that will build the capacity to deal peacefully with the issues that we face through life. But education, being the best tool, is very often one of the first things that suffers in conflict, is one of the rights that is disregarded increasingly. Schools are bombarded and attacked, and education is one of the first things to fall off the table for children. So we are kind of undermining our tool to recover from the conflict and prevent it. And education is only one of the rights in the convention that we celebrate or commemorate. I don't know if we are in a celebratory mood, but commemorate today. We have with us Dragica Mikavica. She is a member of the Office of the Special Representative of Children in Armed Conflict. Dragica, what trends your office has seen in recent years pertaining the fulfillment of the rights or the violation of the rights and the protection of children in armed conflict?
Thank you so much, Sophia. And on behalf of my special representative, Gamba, and our office, thanks to SOS Children's Villages, Belgium, Uruguay, and Guatemala, who are integral partners in this work for our agenda, for inviting us today. So it's a pleasure to be here. And this is not in my notes, but as I was listening to the children in the videos, I was reflecting that 35 years ago, I was living in former Yugoslavia, in a country that was about to fall apart, and I would spend 4 years in conflict, ages 6 to 10. So feeling quite emotional on this anniversary. Indeed, our mandate since its inception in 1999 has grown to monitor grave violations of children's rights, including attacks on schools and hospitals. But for those who are less familiar with this framework, we also monitor and report on recruitment and use, killing and maiming of children, rape and other forms of sexual violence, abduction, and the denial of humanitarian access. And in 2023, which is our last reporting year, UN verified 32,990 grave violations, with killing and maiming, followed by recruitment and use, abduction, and denial of humanitarian access as the highest verified violations. And this is, of course, data across all geographic regions in 26 situations on our agenda currently. So the trends we witness reflect a 21% increase from the previous reporting year in 2022, due to what we saw as the changing nature, complexity, expansion, and intensification of armed conflicts, the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, which we're deeply concerned about due to their disproportionate impact on children, including after conflict ends, deliberate and indiscriminate attacks against civilians and civilian objects, including infrastructure. I think you mentioned that. The advent of new armed groups alongside acute humanitarian crises, and very disturbingly blatant disregard for international humanitarian law and severe violations of international human rights law. So the trends, unfortunately, continue unabated from year to year, and more situations are added to our agenda since we started doing our homework in 1999, when the General Assembly established this office and this mandate. But at this moment in time, given the way the world and the UN are, particularly when we think about transitions of UN peace operations, drawdowns to other or transitions to other peace and security arrangements, our resources to do this work of monitoring and reporting, and also dialogue with parties to conflict to end and prevent those violations, is shrinking. So to just zoom in on one of the violations, I was recently in Libya and South Sudan in the framework of a project that I'm doing to develop guidance for our monitors on the denial of humanitarian access. Really, the figures that reach our desks in New York become real when you're out there speaking with colleagues and affected communities. And one thing that haunts me since the visit to Tripoli in September is a statement by a mom who was attending programs with her children in a UNICEF Child Protection Center in Tripoli, who said she would rather go to the sea than return to Darfur. Heartbreaking. So in both of these places, I've also done some work for the Office of documenting the intersection of climate insecurity and conflict, to see what are the implications for grave violations for children who are, yes, impacted by both. I've traveled to Mozambique, Cabo Delgado province recently to do this, and all of the conversations I had inevitably raised the issue of climate insecurity. So this is just one of the cross-cutting issues that we've been looking at in recent times to kind of derive evidence around what is driving risks and vulnerabilities for these children. Also being cognizant that we cannot only look at a child once the conflict erupts, but really need to look at the whole cycle of violence and the preceding risks, and how do we reintegrate effectively these children to make sure that they do not get pulled into war after the conflict ends. And so just a few more thoughts for us. We've also been really cognizant of how gender inequality or gender norms shape the vulnerability of different children and how they experience these grave violations. For instance, still, we see that boys are more impacted by recruitment and use, whereas girls are more impacted by rape and other forms of sexual violence. But of course, understanding this in our analysis shapes our response. And what we also see is a genuine commitment that is missing to sustainable peace and this respect for international law, as well as implementation of international commitments that we have, which remains the greatest obstacle to the protection of children, to your question. And finally, I will mention that more and more frequently, since we are here on the 35th anniversary of the CRC, we're having to reiterate that children are human beings under 18 years old with as a specific rights of group holders who have protections and rights under the Convention and international law. And when looking at these cross-cutting issues like climate insecurity or gender inequality, recently I did some work on trafficking where we now have the evidence of these linkages. They're often grouped with women and youth and not looked at as a distinct group, which in itself does a huge disservice. So I will just share those few top-line points. Thank you.
Thank you, Dragica. So the situation is dire and discouraging. And the facts you share should make us reflect. Thank you very much as well for sharing your personal reflection and view on it. You said you are emotional. I think we all should be emotional. If there were a little bit more emotion in this institution, we may be doing a bit better. 35 years of pure, hardcore policy brain seems not to be working. So while we need strategic solutions, we also need to reflect once in a while what this is all about. And all of us are in one way or the other affected. Many of the countries that have participated in the video, like Spain or Belgium, are not affected by war. But these children feel for the other children. And I have to say, many of the children that participated in the video have very difficult backgrounds themselves. Many of them work with us and we work for them. So they are with us because they've gone through a lot. And instead of egoistically worrying about their personal situation and all they have had to deal with and they will have to deal with in life, they are thinking of the others that are thousands of kilometers away. And their number one concern is, why are other children suffering around the world? I think that's an interesting lesson that we could all reflect upon, on how putting a bit of empathy on what we do may bring solutions to the table. And you also mentioned gender and other intersectionalities. Laura Perez is our last panelist from Columbia University and an expert on children in conflict. Laura, help us understand a bit more the intersectionalities and vulnerabilities that play in conflict so that we can also fine-tune our response and make sure that children are not only merged in the group of women, young people, and children all together, is different people with different realities that need different solutions, but also how we, within children, there is different realities that we need to tackle and target solutions for when it's about protecting them.
Thank you, Sophia. And thank you to SOS Children's Villages and the mission, the permanent mission of Belgium, for inviting me to participate in today's event and for this important question. Armed conflict impacts all children, but certain intersecting vulnerabilities increase the risk faced by specific groups of children. The concept of intersecting vulnerabilities means that a child might experience multiple overlapping vulnerabilities, like poverty, lack of access to health care, or racial discrimination. A child might be a survivor of sexual violence and have also acquired a disability as a result of armed conflict. When taken together, intersecting vulnerabilities significantly increase the child's susceptibility to negative outcomes compared to a child facing only one of these vulnerabilities. In other words, the combined effect of various vulnerabilities creates a more severe situation for the child. Some examples of intersecting vulnerabilities in situations of armed conflict include gender, which impacts both boys and girls. As my colleague Dragica explained, girls face heightened risks of sexual violence, such as rape or forced marriage during conflict. And girls are often excluded from release and reintegration programs when they haven't participated in hostilities, even though they performed roles that fall under the definition of child soldier, such as domestic tasks like cooking and cleaning, or working as porters carrying materials, or being used sexually. Boys are also disproportionately targeted for forced labor and for recruitment as child soldiers to participate in hostilities because of notions of masculinity. They also suffer sexual violence, but they tend to report it as torture and not as sexual violence because torture is seen as a more masculine violation, and because of the stigma associated with sexual violence against men and boys. Disability is another form of vulnerability. Children with physical or intellectual disabilities are at greater risk of being left behind during evacuations. For example, they may lose access to assistive devices such as wheelchairs, hearing aids, or prosthetics, which are needed for their mobility, communication, and independence. Without these devices, their ability to move to safety or even communicate their needs can be severely limited. Also, early warnings about danger may not be accessible to children with disabilities. A child who is hearing impaired cannot respond to a siren they cannot hear, and a child with cognitive impairments may need simplified instructions to understand how to respond to warnings. Children with disabilities are also often excluded from humanitarian programs because their specific needs are not considered or understood. Unaccompanied or separated children is another group of children with specific vulnerabilities, as was mentioned today by Madame Boykins. Children separated from their families during conflict are at greater risk of exploitation and abuse, including trafficking, sexual violence, and recruitment and use by armed actors. Also, lack of family support increases their vulnerability to psychological trauma. Another group of children are children from ethnic or religious minorities. Children who belong to ethnic or religious minorities often face targeted violence and discrimination and are sometimes excluded from aid due to their identity. An example are Rohingya children in Myanmar who've suffered both ethnic persecution and the broader impacts of armed conflict. And the last one I wanted to mention are children associated with armed forces or armed groups or child soldiers as they are more commonly known. Child soldiers, regardless of whether they participated in hostilities, face high levels of stigma and experience difficulties reintegrating back into their communities. This is especially true for children who were recruited and used by groups designated as terrorist organizations. They are being increasingly detained by governments on national security charges using counterterrorism laws. And they are treated as criminals who should be prosecuted instead of being treated as victims of violations of international law who should be protected and given reintegration support. To protect children in armed conflict, we must recognize and address these intersecting vulnerabilities and really tailor humanitarian responses across these various vulnerabilities. I wanted to share two examples of these programs. One is in DRC and one is in Jordan. The program in DRC is run by UNICEF, and it's a program to reintegrate child soldiers. It provides gender-specific programming for girls who may not have participated in combat, but were performing other tasks like domestic tasks or being forced to be wives. This program addresses their unique trauma and provides vocational training for these girls. At the same time, it provides counseling for all the children in the program to help them process experiences of violence and coercion. It also provides community engagement to reduce the stigma and support reintegration back into those communities. And finally, it works on cultural sensitivities, dealing with traditional healing ceremonies that are incorporated to help children cleanse from the roles that they have performed in conflict and helping them to be accepted back into the community. The other example is a program in Jordan. It's a trauma-sensitive education program in Jordan for Syrian refugee children. Through this program, Syrian refugee children are given trauma-informed teaching methods that support their dealing with PTSD and anxiety. There are also gender-segregated classrooms with cultural norms, when cultural norms require them, to ensure that girls can safely attend schools. And there's access for children with disabilities through adaptive learning materials and inclusive policies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Stigma, torture, abandonment, blame, loss of family, that's a lot to deal with for an individual and especially for a child. It's no surprising they are angry, as they said in the video, and it's actually surprising they are not more angry. That's the panorama. Now let's think, what does this mean with the facts at hand and some of the solutions at hand and some examples at hand? What does this mean at the country level? What happens during the conflict, but also after the conflict? The conflict is not over when the media goes away, the Security Council stops talking about it, and we move on into our next headache, I guess. The conflict goes on for decades, and in the life of an individual child, for very, very long time, and often intergenerationally. So to bring this down to earth and to get concrete on how this really affects a country and affects a society and the children, we have the pleasure to have my dear friend and colleague, Sophie Ndong. She's the National Director of SOS Sierra Leone. Sophie, you have daily experience on dealing with children and living in a country that has a very complex history of conflict. How does this all we've been talking about translate at the national level? How do you see this developing in the real life of people?
Thank you so much, Sophia. It's such a pleasure to be here and an honor. And indeed, I relate to everything that has been said so far, particularly the voices of the children. They resonate very much with what we hear on a daily basis in Sierra Leone. 22 years after the civil war that happened in Sierra Leone, we are still facing the consequences. You can see it in the eyes, the behavior, the mentality of the children, the young people, but also adults. And that tells you the correlation that must happen and takes place, because in the way we implement our programs, it constantly calls for a shift and an adaptation with the changes that must occur. You come up with the plan, you start the whole project cycle management, and then you have to adjust yourself because you realize that either the people you're dealing with are not there yet, but if you really want to make the impact, you have to go by what the needs of the people are. And from my perspective, this is what I've been learning for the past 6 years, living in this beautiful country with beautiful people, but yet severe consequences of the war. I'm going to take the example of the education system. I was baffled to learn from the former UNDP representative and the former EcoBank managing director from the Gambia that they studied in Sierra Leone back in the days. And so Nigeria, Ghana, Gambia, all of the Anglophone countries in the West Africa region were studying in Sierra Leone. The country had one of the best education systems in the region. I was really surprised and shocked. When you look at the system today, it's completely down and destroyed. You have, some of my colleagues will tell you, or even across sectors, having certain types of degrees, but when you look at the content of what they are really able to produce, you see the emptiness of it. And so we seriously have capacity and quality issues. These are all consequences of it. We need to rethink about it. When I look at trauma management, sexual and gender-based violence, mental health, substance abuse that have been perpetrated over the years, generation after generation, these are all consequences of the war. When I came in Sierra Leone in 2018, a year later, not even, the president declared state of emergency for sexual abuse and rape because it's still rampant in the society. And unless we see a change, it will continue. That means when we provide the care for children who have lost parental care and those at risk of losing it, we don't only have to look at the children, but also the adults who are providing that care to them. And this is why I shifted the whole strategy and looked at it from an angle of an African young leader, a woman and a mother that has gone also through some series of challenges in life, but had the opportunity to have access to coaches and therapists. And this was not the same situation or the same opportunity with the people I'm working with in Sierra Leone. And so I started focusing on mental health. I started focusing on the people with the big P and really looking at how I can support them so they are better equipped to help the children. How are we going to be able to look in details and break it down really at the issues that they are dealing with? You mentioned the child soldiers. We know that one of the consequences that they had was the memory issues, reintegration issues, mental health, and all of that we are still seeing today. And so it really breaks my heart on a daily basis to see that 22 years later, it's still there. And I still have the hope when I listen to the children that we can still continue fighting for the rights of the child. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, it's quite clear. We are going to listen to the children again, but I'm going to do a little alteration in the program. And as Sophie talked about mental health, Laura, I know you know quite a bit about that. Can you give us some pointers? What is mental health? Seems to be the topic that is always there and never there in an obvious way. The trauma. You can correct many things in a faster way, even rebuild economic systems in a faster way than you can rebuild the mental health of a severely traumatized child or adult. Tell us a bit, what is the impact in the mental health in the children and the adult that they will become of war and conflict and lack of peace overall?
Thank you, Sophia.
And we are a bit short on time, so let me be the moderator for a second and just praise you guys for, as always, yeah.
So indeed, armed conflict has profound and long-lasting effects on children's mental health, which can have ripple effects into their adult lives, shaping their futures and often the future of their communities. Recent research conducted by the World Health Organization shows that over 22% of people living in conflict areas suffer from mental health conditions, which is 3 times the global average. For children, the intense stress of living through a war can lead to mental health conditions such as anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression. As part of my answer, I will discuss some of the immediate and long-term effects of armed conflict on the mental health of children, the impact on the adults they will become, and some of the barriers to mental health services. So in terms of immediate psychological impact on children, exposure to violence, we know that exposure to violence, such as witnessing or experiencing violence, bombings, killings, or sexual violence, leaves children traumatized, with many developing post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. Separation from family is another factor. Being separated from parents or caregivers due to displacement, abduction, or death creates intense feelings of insecurity, abandonment, and grief. And the loss of normalcy. Conflict disrupts routines like schooling and play and relationships, robbing children of the stability and safety they need for healthy psychological development. There are also long-term effects on mental health. Emotional dysregulation, for example. This is a result of repeated exposure to trauma that can lead to difficulties managing emotions, including anger, and that can persist into adulthood. There's the inability to trust. Children exposed to betrayal or violence by caregivers, community members, or armed actors often struggle with forming trusting relationships later in life. And there's survivor's guilt. Some children who survive when peers or family members are killed experience guilt, which further compounds their trauma, further compounds the trauma they experience from the loss of their family members. All this has an impact on the adults they will become. One of those impacts is cognitive and educational deficits. Chronic stress and trauma during childhood disrupts brain development, impairing memory, concentration, and decision-making. This often negatively impacts educational goals and career opportunities for adults. There's also the cycles of violence. Untreated trauma can perpetuate cycles of violence. Children who have been exposed to violence may struggle to transition to peaceful roles in society and may become perpetrators of violence themselves. And there's community rebuilding challenges. Adults with unresolved trauma may struggle to contribute meaningfully to post-conflict recovery, governance, or peace building. Just quickly, some of the barriers to mental health support. Stigma is one of them. In many cultures, seeking mental health support is stigmatized, leaving children and adults to suffer in silence. There are also lack of resources. Mental health and psychosocial support is one of the least funded sectors in humanitarian response. And there's focus on physical needs. Humanitarian programs often prioritize physical survival over psychological care, leaving mental health needs unmet. And if I could just add the role of mental health in support of breaking those silos of trauma for children. Psychosocial support, programs that provide trauma-informed care, such as counseling, play therapy, and peer support groups can really help children process their experiences. There's also community-based approaches, where empowering local leaders, teachers, and caregivers with basic mental health training ensures that support reaches children even in resource-constrained environments. And lastly, education is healing. As our UNESCO colleague has mentioned, restoring education not only provides stability, but also helps children recover a sense of purpose and normalcy, critical for long-term healing. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, it's essential, as I have our director of SOS Belgium sitting here, I will mention SOS Belgium launched an initiative about healing and trauma called City Jewel. We don't have time to go into it. That's another event. We'll send you the invitation in a couple of months. No, but you can check it online, the importance of raising awareness and the stigmatizing, difficult word, trauma. It's essential for the long-term and the short-term well-being of children. This is the panorama for our own mental health, and not to fall into depression after hearing the panorama we have ahead. We're going to go back to the children, and we are going to hear from them some solutions. Then I'm going to do a very quick round again with everybody in the panel to send a message to them, to send a message to governments. Let's leave here with solutions. Let's leave here with hope. And I'll get back to you, but let's first listen to the children.
Every day children are dying. We are stomping for peace. Please stop the war.
Yo me siento muy triste por los que están en la guerra y por los que mueren.
Ég hugsa stundum hvað myndi gerast ef hann myndi koma hingað til Íslands. Maður gæti bara þeir út að leika sér og allt í einu og sprengir eða eitthvað.
Ik begreep niet waarom mensen kinderen gestorven en huizen kapot maken.
Quand j'entends parler de la guerre, je me sens désespéré.
Conflict is not a good thing. It affects us in so many ways. And when conflict occurs, we children are not able to go to school.
Man ser att ens föräldrar blir ledsna och rädda, och när man ser att andra människor inte kan komma överens.
I don't get why we can't have peace since we're all the same species.
أنا كطفلة بعتقد إنه من حقنا نعيش بأمان، ولازم الحرب تتوقف فوراً حالياً يعني حتى نرجع نلعب ونتعلم بأمان ونكون أطفال يعيشوا بسلام.
Los niños no pueden estar sin padres o padres sin niños, entonces para que no haya más conflictos, que analicen lo que hacen para que ya no haya más guerras.
Ich würde wünschen, dass kein Krieg herrscht und die Kinderrechte mehr ernst genommen.
И питам само jedno, da smo kao društvo civilizacije zakazali.
We are calling on world leaders to place the well-being of children at the top of their agendas.
Do everything you can to safeguard children's rights. Ensure the children are no longer the target or victims of violence.
Together, as we storm for peace, we can make every child's dream shine even brighter. Let's storm together.
eine Welt schaffen, in der jedes Kind ohne Angst leben kann.
Good. One highlight for me of the video is how many children start by saying, I don't understand. I don't understand if we are the same species, why we fight. I don't understand how governments cannot come up with another solution. And I would ask you, and you don't need to answer, but within you, do you understand why 35 years after the convention? I'm sure I'm sure all of us can put in this room can put a rational argument about economics, geopolitics, and others. But do you understand with the heart that we are still doing what we are doing, and we wake up every day to come to this building or other buildings and do what we are doing? If I had to explain to the children in the video, and I have a 3-year-old, so she still doesn't ask, but she will soon enough, I'm not sure I know how to answer because I also don't understand. So let's go back quickly now for solutions so that we can get to understanding and solving. Lily, what are your recommendations? And again, we are a bit short on time, so some bullet points. And we have to start somewhere. It's a big task ahead, a lot of resolutions going on, and a lot of things to do. But what is the first thing that we need to do in order to do this? And if you have any message for the children that participated and will participate in the campaign in the future, what's your message to them?
Thank you. I think you won't be surprised that I'll start by saying that the major solutions can start at the benches of schools. Even though we don't understand why so many conflicts are going online, I would say I don't understand how nowadays, 21st century, we have 250 million children out of school, many of them in conflict situation. We have 750 million adolescents and adults that cannot read or do basic math, and we have a deficit of $460 billion needed to be invested in education in order for SDG 4, the education goal, to be fulfilled by 2030. So we also don't understand that, particularly when in our discussions around education for peace, the clear message was that indeed peace is not an absence of violence and conflict. Peace is rather a positive, participatory, and dynamic process that nurtures indeed the ability of each learner to value human dignity, but also learn how to care about ourselves, learn how to care about others and about the planet. So indeed, I'm very encouraged by the resolve of the young children's message, and also to add, yes, education, critically important to advance critical thinking, advance digital competencies, advance media and digital literacy in order to tackle spread of hate speech, of misinformation, all these threats that are presented to us as some triggers for conflicts, and again, education for gender equality and for inclusion. So thank you so much for the opportunity to engage, and best of luck to all.
Thank you, Lily. Dragica, same question to you. Any solutions? Where do we start? And messages for the kids?
Thank you, Sophia. There's definitely a lot that we can do. I would, in the words of my SRSG, say we have to go back to the basics and reiterate the importance of upholding children's rights. Children as persons under 18 years old who need to be documented at birth and registered at birth, so that we can track them and protect them more effectively, and all of those other rights that are encompassed in the convention. I think that we can also do more to ensure that peace processes and peace agreements take into account prevention of violations and listen to the voices of children directly, of course, with all the safeguards in place. To create conditions for sustainable peace and to be truly inclusive when supporting mediation, for instance, peace agreements. My office developed a very practical tool, which is a guidance dedicated to mediators that we've been rolling out, and this is something that we can continue to use. I have to, going back to Laura's points on intersectionality, again say that really we need to integrate into our analysis gender, age, ethnicity, and disability as factors that determine vulnerability of children, as I stated, and should shape our response as such. And I would also reiterate the point on looking at cross-cutting issues as essential to truly understanding the risks that drive these grave violations. Next year, for member states in the room, I have to also, for 1 second, just say when our mandate is renewed with the Rights of the Child resolution, to take into account the current realities and under which we operate and implement this agenda and the shrinking space and resources for that. I have the right colleagues in the room, I think, for that resolution. And finally, we've heard the resounding stomps of the children today that powerfully echo our own internal urgency to protect them in conflict situations, and we'll continue to listen to them directly, actually, through a new campaign we'll be launching in a few months called Prove It Matters, that will center exclusively around their voices. Thank you.
Listen directly to them. I go with that message. Sophie, why do we need to act? What's your message as a person dealing with this every day in a very practical way? What's your message? Why do we need to act, and what should we do?
Thank you very much, Sophia. I think we should start with ourselves. We all have been children. And as human beings, we have hearts. The carelessness is too much. And sometimes we come up with these global policies, strategies, and all these nice papers. But sometimes it's very simple to go back to the foundation of who we are as human beings and just care and do the right thing in our own little circles of influence. As a leader and as a mother, the power that I have, how do I use it? And how do I make sure that I contribute to serve humanity? How do I make sure that with the little that I have, I still can create impact? I don't need to wait for the millions of dollars or euros and the beautiful projects. I can just go with the simple lines in my budget and come up with initiatives that still bring the smile back on the faces of children. How do I make sure that I tackle the holistic development of the people with the mind, the body, the soul, and the heart? How do I make sure that we, as partners, we combine our resources, we come together, we coordinate, we communicate instead of competing, so that the place of this world is better for all us to live and the children. And lastly, like my daughter and son will tell me when I promise to do something, Mommy, make sure you keep your promises. How can we keep our promises for the children? How can we continue to be credible in this world that needs peace more than ever before? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to close the panel. We've talked about the solutions. We've also said we are sometimes undermining our own solutions, so let's think about that twice. We've talked a lot about bringing the humanity back into what we do daily as institutions and as individuals. And I want to add one point. Hilde started by saying that children still look at the UN and trust the UN will do something for them. In some countries more than others, and some children more than others. In my experience, 12 years with SOS, every time I talk to the kids that I travel all over to learn from, they still say, oh, the UN is the place, when we bring them, it's my childhood dream to be. Just today, I heard somebody saying it's a young African child is happy to be here today. There is still respect for this institution. But we have to wonder for how long can we take that for granted? Because they are stomping today in a cute way, like a 3-year-old stomps. I deal with that every day. But that stomping can become more than stomping. and it can become more and more aggressive. And it can translate into distrust in institutions. And we have just adopted, and I promise I'm not gonna get technical now, but we have just adopted a pact for the future that has the word trust and rebuilding trust in it, control F it, 27 times. This is what trust is about. So it's not only peace because it's in the CRC, and it is international humanitarian law, and it is the right thing to do, and it is the moral compass, but it is what will keep or not the multilateral system and the trust of our people, regardless of country's political person in place, going or not going. Let's close the panel with that, a call to action, an urge to action, solutions on the table. We are really short on time, as always, and we have to go do many other important things. I'm going to take one or two comments from the floor, questions, very, very brief. If anybody has something urgent to say, urgent and brief to say, otherwise we will go into closing remarks. I see the colleagues from Sierra Leone, and then
Chair, for giving me the floor, and thank you to all our panelists for their very insightful interventions. Yes, currently the world is experiencing a record number of armed conflicts as well as violations against children. And speaking from a regional perspective, particularly to the current situation in West Africa and the Sahel, and I'm happy that our representative from the SRSG's office made that correlation between climate change and security, where we find in that region that recruitment and use is linked to the radicalization towards violent extremism of children and young people, is tied to the lack of access to basic necessities. So my intervention is really just seeking clarity to what mechanisms or what solutions do you have in place for the sustainability of programmatic responses, as well as those that target rehabilitation and reintegration. I'm happy to hear about whether the role of government, which we do agree have primary responsibility, but also the role of local NGOs in making sure these interventions are sustainable, especially with time to come. I'm representative from SOS just spoke about the long-term impact of conflict, even years down the line. So I'm happy to hear from anyone from the panel. Thank you.
May I? Thank you so much, Chair. I'm from the mission of Ukraine. First of all, thank you so much for organizing such an emotional event. For me personally, it resonates so hard because all said from all the panelists are so much relevant for my country, Ukraine. I can't tell how angry I am reading and knowing daily that children were killed by missiles, by drones, entire families. It's heartbreaking, and I no answer, and this answer is of course back to the fundamental principles and values, to the UN Charter, and all the aggressions must stop immediately. And today we have 1,000 days of full-scale invasion of Ukraine, 1,000 days of horror that children have endured. So of course it must stop. It's absolutely no question, and Ukrainians are the most wanted this peace, just and lasting peace. But let me also thank you for the SOS children's villages who are working in Ukraine for almost 20 years, and you are doing such incredible, remarkable work. There's your efforts to support orphan children, to reunite families, to support the vulnerable families, and especially during the war, your work on the ground are absolutely invaluable. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ukraine, and thank you, Natalia. I'm gonna move on. We have the honor and the pleasure to have Ambassador Del Águila Castillo to close the event for today, offer thoughts and reflections. Thank you, Ambassador, for staying with us all through. The floor is yours. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ti, Sofía.
Thank you, Sophia.
By the voices that we've heard today, and those countless that we still haven't heard. And if that doesn't move you, we have a problem in this room, and we have a problem in this organization. We've heard a clear and emphatic call for a world free of conflict and free of war. No child should fear of being separated from their family. No child should fear if they're going to have their next meal, if they're going to have shelter, if they're going to be able to learn. Children are sponges. How many lives have been disrupted by conflict? And what are we doing about it? No child should fall victim of sexual violence, be forced to labor. No child should have to worry that other children are suffering and have that reflection of the disparities that we have in this world. The message today was clear. It's a call to action for all of us. Policymakers, institutions, community leaders, parents. Let us take these powerful words to heart and transform them in concrete actions and ensure that the rights that we have in the Convention of the Rights of the Child, the protocols, the mandates that we've created, for them to actually fulfill what we need. And thank you for raising the intersectionality of having that sensitivity of what children with disabilities need, of the cultural sensitivities that need to be taken into account when we're trying to heal these children. We need to have that empathy. We're talking about human beings that will be the leaders of the next generation. Let us not fail them. Let us hear that stomp for peace. And let us not forget the millions of children whose lives have been torn apart and yearn some resemblance of normalcy. To the children that hurt us today, we are listening and stomp harder. And to all of us, it takes a village. Let's get into action now. Thank you all.
Wow. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, everyone. Let's get to work.